This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom Tom Tresser. He's a civil educator and a public defender, and also of the CivicLab. We also have with us WZRD trainee who will jump in with questions in case anything interesting comes up and she wants some clarification. Hello, Tom. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me onto the show, you wizards over there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Uh, Tom, first of all, what is your position at the Civic Lab?
I am a co-founder
Mhm.
and the COO, Chief Operating Officer, and I guess you could say I'm also the Chief Content Officer. So I write, think, and do training
Mhm.
for
Well,
the Civic Lab.
yes, yes. How do you have a lot of people that are interested? Because you mainly concentrate on the intricacies of tax increment funding, and that's TIPS, TIFs. Um,
Yes.
uh, we'll discuss that further. But is there anything else that you concentrate on as the in depth?
Yeah, the Civic Lab is online at civiclab.us, and we invite everyone to check us out. We are a black-led nonprofit do tank. So we do a lot of research, but it's not just for academic sake. It's to put it into the street and have people use our information so they can make a better community and take control of their destinies. So we do a lot of research into the finances of the city, and that includes the TIPS, the tax increment financing. But we also train people on how to be good organizers, how to win in public life, how to run for local office. We've trained about 12,000 people in the last few years.
Of those 12,000 people, do you have any number about how many have won the race for public office?
Well, that would be like one. It's very difficult for the people that we're working with because this is grassroots organizers with very limited resources. But you often have to run more than once to win when you start from the grassroots. I'd say about 18 people that we've trained decided to actually run for local office, but we've trained many, many more who have helped out
Mhm.
campaigns,
Mhm.
which is also very important. We also train people how to be organizers. We also have quite a lot of training for nonprofit organizations that are in the social justice field. We train people about how to raise money, how to think strategically, do strategic planning, how for their boards, the board of directors, how to develop those boards, and also how for nonprofits to engage in public policy advocacy, to change the law. So we do quite a lot of that as well.
Could you give us a couple of names of organizations that you have trained and how they've improved after the training, if possible?
Well, we were the main training partners for the Illinois Access to Justice Coalition for the past year, and that is 65 frontline organizations that are doing immigration work and incarceration work. The West Side Justice Center, to name one, the Spanish Community Center, the Northern Illinois Neighbors for Justice, and dozens more took trainings. I think we offered 40 workshops, and they were all highly rated. So the participants, a couple of hundred of them, thought that the workshops were very valuable and gave us about a 4.7 out of 5 in the ratings. And so we're hoping that the training, how to be a good board member, how to raise money, how to develop programs. These are some of the trainings we offered have seeped down into those organizations, and they're better for it. We've heard anecdotally that we made a big difference, and now we're working with a new organization of artists called Stomping Grounds, and they work with juvenile people in the juvenile justice system, and they train them in writing and in media arts and other ways. So they take classes into the juvenile justice system, and we'll be starting with them as well for development, fundraising, how to run your organization powerfully. So yeah, those are a few.
We've spoken with a lot of nonprofits, and they say that it's so hard to fundraise. So, what tips do you give them? And what from those tips, were they able to get funding?
Well, we're not able to keep up with all these dozens and dozens of groups. We hope they are, but the fundamentals that we are teaching start with your strong mission. So all nonprofits, of course, are driven by mission, even the university that you work at, which is a nonprofit. So if the mission is not clear and powerful, then you're not going to be able to raise money or secure volunteers or attract board members. So part of what we try to teach our collaborators is please take a look at your mission statement and make sure it is sharp, compelling, and very clear, and has to do a few things. It not only has to explain to people quickly what it is your organization does, but why you do it and why you're different or special. So in other words, if you're a small theater company and you say your mission is we do great theater for the people of Chicago, that's a bad mission statement. You know what I'm saying? So it's an exercise that the nonprofits have to go to review their mission statements and to make sure they are in fact super powerful. Then after that, we talk about, well, how do you write a grant? How do you search for grants? What kind of material do you need to be able to write a good grant and pursue foundations, etc., as well as individual donors. So we also teach what we call fundraising or friend raising. Again, we're talking about small groups, not big hospitals and groups with millions of dollars. We're talking about small groups who have to take advantage of the relationships they have in the community. Even a car wash, for some groups is a very nice way to raise money and to build bonds in the community. So these are the kinds of things we talk about when we're with our nonprofit partners.
You mentioned do tank. So there are think tanks, and do tanks is actually this the word DO and TANK, right? Do tanks, is that what you meant?
Yes, a do tank is as opposed to a think tank,
Mm-hmm.
where we just sort of think and put a study on the shelf
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't go anywhere. Our research and our thinking is aimed at making people smarter in public life so they can individually and collectively use this information and their skills to change the future.
When you mentioned the do tank, that kind of relates to the mission statement that you have these organizations, right, that is compelling and unique. Do you have an example of an organization in which their mission statement is unique and apart from other similar organizations?
Well, offhand, no, I can't think of any. We deal with so many.
What
But
about your own mission statement? What about the CivicLab's own mission statement? How is that different from other civic organizations?
yeah, well, I would say it's the CivicLab is a Chicago-based, Black-led 501c3 nonprofit do tank to accelerate work in government accountability, civic engagement, and social justice. So that would be the very tight, piece. But then what we also say is you also have to have a few more sentences. So after you're able to deliver your mission statement, someone might say, oh, that sounds very interesting. Tell me more. So the tell me more is maybe like a few more sentences that you can offer. And I would say something like, the CivicLab engages in research in order to train and equip leaders to imagine a better future and to take us to that future. So again, that's a little more extra.
So the extra sentences, are they part of the mission statement, or is
That's sort of like the second set. That's sort of a larger. There's like three pieces here. There's a mission statement that's very quick. Then there's the extra content that you might add on a document, or casually talk to somebody, or maybe in an email. And then there's like a whole 2 pages, which when someone would say, hey Tom, your organization sounds interesting, tell me more. What I would do is, okay, well, let me let me email you this 2-page document that has a little more narrative in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that comes later. And so what we tell people is, when you're trying to sell your organization, when you're trying to bring volunteers in, when you're trying to raise money, you take it in those steps. You give people that quick bite of the apple, and then when they want more, you have these extra materials. And then finally, you have a whole package, like, 20 pages with your budget, with the bios of your staff, with examples of the press. That's the last thing you give people after they've expressed interest. And so we coach our organizations to make sure you have all that ready to go, so that when your leader is out there meeting someone in the community and they express interest, you can give them something very quickly and then say, let me send you some information as soon as I get back to the office. And you have the right set of materials, and it's always up to date.
Well, that 20 pager that you spoke about is very similar to the website. The website contains much of the same information. However, when you spoke about additional content, how does the vision statement fit into this additional content?
Well, you have on your computer a set of materials. So the CEO or the head of development or the head of volunteering would have a folder on her computer that would have all these different materials. There might be one pager that would have the logo, the mission statement, the address, and maybe a few other facts, like maybe the last year's budget, and maybe some quotes. So it's something very simple that I could send, or someone could send to you to see if you're further interested. And then once a person expresses interest, then you have, well, fine, that's great. Let me send you my full package, which would have program descriptions, have bios of our people, press examples. Now, you wouldn't send that to everybody. You would only send it to somebody after they've expressed some interest. And the same way as if you're trying to write a grant, a lot of times grants are very specific. They want you to answer very specific questions relating to the subject matter. But at the same time, they often ask for background materials, which you are free to provide the funder. So that might be, again, a narrative. How did your organization get started? Testimony. We often tell our collaborators to collect stories, which are very powerful. So when someone is impacted by your organization, please get them to testify, whatever your organization is, if it's a theater or a literacy program. I'm sure if you go to the website of your school, you'll find testimony from alumni who say, this school really was important to me. And I'm sharing my testimony because I want other people to come to the school, and I want people to donate to the school. So the fundraising department of your college, of your university, is going to have many examples of alumni and people who have done very well after leaving the school. And that's part of what we're trying to tell our collaborators. Make sure you collect those stories.
You mentioned earlier about applying for grants, and then we learned that, for instance, at the City of Chicago, the Business Affairs and Consumer Protection Agency department, they have grants, and they send out RFPs. So in those RFPs, these nonprofits actually have to have what they're asking for. Let's say they're asking for $250,000. Then they have to already have proof that they already have $250,000 in their bank account, so that as they're using the money, then they have to use their own money, and then they have to justify what they have used it for in order to get reimbursement from the BACP. Has the CivicLab studied that? And then also, is there any way that how could the grassroots organizations have any of this money to actually do this work? It's usually work on behalf of the community, helping businesses, etc.
Yeah, some of the city grants are very difficult to get, and it's not that many organizations that have $250,000 lying around that they can front the cost. So the CivicLab, and we're not too thrilled by a lot of what the city offers. nonprofits. So the city of Chicago is pretty stingy, actually. Now, I spent most of my early career in the arts. I was a theater producer, and the city of Chicago has been very stingy to its cultural community. And we know that other cities in America and across the globe have, literally hundreds of millions of dollars that they make available to the arts communities. But in Chicago, it's pathetic. So yeah, there's a lot of hoops that they require you to jump through, and having the requirement that you have to front the money in order to get a grant is very difficult. So that would mean an example that you just cited, a small grassroots group probably couldn't get it because they don't have that money. So now you're talking about an organization that maybe has a budget of $4 to $7 million, and they're doing pretty well. So yeah, they could apply for that particular grant and probably manage it. But for the small little guys, the ones that we work with, that's beyond their reach.
Mhm. And there's no solution to get around that at all, right? That you could see. It seems
Well,
as
not
if
in
it's
the example you're talking about, where if the grant requires you to spend the money up front. So they should just relax that restriction and award that grant to the deserving organization, and just give them the cash. Don't make me spend it up front. It's crippling. Small groups just simply don't have that kind of cash flow. So again, the city of Chicago and the way it does economic development, the CivicLab is very critical of it. You mentioned tax increment financing or TIFs. We believe that those are racist and corrupting, and we have been tracking TIFs for about 13 years. And our project is called the TIF Illumination Project, and it's online at tifreports.com. And people can go to that website and check out the work. Tax increment financing districts are run by the city. They are supposedly in the name of economic development, but they actually serve the reverse purpose, and they take money from poor communities and they lock that money in wealthier communities. So it's actually the opposite of what they claim to do. And their TIFs are in 49 states, I would tell you. And it is a giant scam across America.
Well, when we were discussing those grants in which the organizations have to front the money, then it's kind of similar to what you're talking about with TIPS. It's only meant to benefit a certain crowd that already has the money. It doesn't help the people that do need the funds.
Yeah, well, that's and you have to remember, we're talking about Chicago. We are in Chicago. We're speaking about Chicago, right? Chicago is the most corrupt city in America. I hope this doesn't shock your listeners, your students and your colleagues, but this city is the most corrupt city in America, and it's measured by Professor Dick Simpson at the University of Illinois, who is a former alderman and a professor of government there for the last 50 years. And what Professor Simpson does is he tracks all the arrests and lawsuits at the federal level. So we're talking about public officials who get taken to the district court here. And so it's not just the local alderman here in the city of Chicago, but he also tracks the county as well. But when you put all that together, Chicago has a staggering number of corrupt cases. Now, there are 2 aldermen in the city council right now under indictment. And that would be Ed Burke and let me see, she's from the 34th Ward.
Carrie Austin? Are you talking about Carrie Austin?
Carrie Austin, thank you. Yeah, so Carrie Austin and Ed Burke are both under federal indictment, and both have to do with corruption related to TIFs, interestingly enough. So if those 2 individuals go to prison, that would be 35 aldermen since 1973. That's a lot of aldermen.
You have been working for at least 13 years on the TIF illumination project. In the beginning, was it just research, and then when did it meld together into the actual TIF illumination project?
Well, it started, my obsession with tax increment financing districts started back in 2009 when I was fighting the Olympic bid. So I was part of an organization called No Game Chicago. You can see that sign behind me. No Game Chicago. You can still see our work at nogameschicago.com. This was a group of organizers who did not want the Olympics to come here in 2016. So for those of you who've been around a few years, you will remember that Mayor Daley threw everything he had at securing the 2016 Summer Games for Chicago. He raised $95 million, and he basically hypnotized, seduced, or threatened the entire civic architecture of Chicago to obey him and back the bid, even though many people secretly said it was a terrible idea. But they dare not dispute the mayor, because Mayor Daley was a vindictive SOB, and he would ruin you or take your organization down if you crossed him. So nobody except us, really, the small group of volunteers, were opposing the bid. Now, one of the reasons or rationales for getting the games here, if you have to go back in time, was Mayor Daley said we have no money, that Chicago is broke. And not only do we have no money, but we have no ideas on how to get prosperous. So we don't have any ideas. We're kind of bankrupt with our ideas, and we're bankrupt with our money. So how smart are we to bring the games to Chicago? Because that will be jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs. That's what they said. And with all the incoming tourists, it'll be billions and billions of dollars that we're going to get from hosting the games. That's what they said. Well, we didn't believe any of it. But in order to negate his argument that Chicago is broke, we took a look at the TIF program. So what we did is took a look at Chicago's TIFs. This is, now we're talking about 2009. And we got a hold of all the annual reports, the TIF reports of 2008. And there were 164 of these little documents. So imagine a bunch of volunteers sitting around opening up these PDFs one at a time. I mean, it doesn't get any more basic than that kind of research. But what we were looking for was the balance sheet. Each TIF had a bank account. And what we wanted to know was how much money, and now when we're talking about property taxes, right? So this is money from Chicagoans, how much was sitting in the TIF accounts at the time. And the answer was $1.5 billion. So that's a piece of news that made a lot of headlines. So how could we be broke? Why do we need to bring the games to Chicago, which is a terrible idea, and would probably make us lose $20 billion. So instead of doing that, let's do something else. That was the start of my fascination with TIFs.
So, and because we lose money with the $20.5 billion, is that on account of all the infrastructure that they have to build, and in order to get the games to Chicago, but all that $20.5 billion would be going to insiders and not directly to the people? It would not be benefiting people, but only insiders. And is that why we would be losing the $20.5 billion?
Yeah, because each of the games have gone over budget, usually by 100 to 200%. So it's well documented. Now, again, we're talking about 2009. The Beijing games had just been over. So that information was before us. So that we knew was monstrously expensive, the Beijing Summer Games, and also how civil liberties were destroyed, how people were killed when they protested the games, and how villages were razed. I mean, it was a horrible human rights affront. Now, since we did that fight, we've had the 2010 games, 12. I mean, we've had 3 or 4 games, and all of those have gone 20, 30, $40 billion over budget. I can tell you this, while we were fighting the battle here, they were building the London 2012 games. So the 2012 games were yet to come, but they were already $5 billion to $6 billion over budget. So that's one reason why we said it was going to lose money, because these things just are so terribly, terribly expensive. And Chicago bungles everything. Everything we touch here costs more money when we built the Millennium Park, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. So everything we touch in Chicago is bungled and way more expensive. So you've got that, and then Chicago also has to build the Olympic Village. And the Olympic Village is only supposed to be used for the games, and that was going to be at least a $2 billion operation. So that's how we got, some of our estimations. And so yes, the construction unions, the guys that are sort of doing the marketing, also security. Now remember, this is before cybercrime. Cybercrime was in the future. But what happens with the Olympics is the IOC will tell you, the host city, what you need to do, and they can make you do anything. It doesn't matter what the bid is. What you said was, back in 2009 when the games were being awarded. This is 7 years in the future. So now it comes to be 2015, 2016. All of a sudden, cybercrime is something that is very dangerous, but it wasn't around back when you were. It doesn't matter. The IOC could tell Chicago, had we hosted the 2006 games, is you have to buy 15,000 computers. You have to, you have to harden all the software. It doesn't matter if it costs an extra $2 billion. You have to have drones flying around, whatever they think is needed, and the city must pay. So there was an X factor of unknown dimensions, and we just thought it would be totally horrendous for the city.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said that Mayor Daley was very vindictive. So you were the CivicLab was the only organization fighting the Olympic proposal. What did Mayor Daley do against the CivicLab?
Well, the CivicLab didn't form until 2013. So it was just me and these other people who had No Game Chicago. Like I say, it was an ad hoc group.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all I can say personally is I think I became radioactive. I think my career suffered. I've never been hired by anybody. I can't get any, when we formed the CivicLab in 2013, we had a physical space that was, I think it was the first co-working space, a maker space for civics in America. And since then, I think we've written maybe 50 grants or proposals or for fellowships, and they've been all turned down. So I'm a little paranoid. It says it's possible that I got so many people angry from our opposition, my opposition to the Olympics. We named names, and it's possible that I'm still paying the consequences. It's entirely possible.
In other words, you've been blackballed.
Possibly, it's a high probability. Absolutely.
Well, in with your study of tips and illumination of tips, have you experienced any retaliation about that?
Well, I just think it's probably made me more disliked, because this is talking about big power. This is a lot of money. So the TIFs in Chicago, even though there's not as many as there used to be, they still managed to peel off $825 million in 2020. So when we challenge that, and we're saying that's a racist practice, you are challenging a lot of people's money. I mean, the developers, the lawyers, the city itself, Mayor Lightfoot loves TIFs, and we're saying to all those people, stop it. I mean, that's a dangerous practice. So we're working with activists in 14 different cities right now across the Midwest, from Kentucky to Oklahoma to Detroit to a lot of cities right here in Chicago. And we're trying to help them become smart about TIFs. And we get a lot of love from those guys, from the neighbors, because when TIFs suddenly show up, as they did in Louisville a year and a half ago, 9 Black communities are grouped together around the Mississippi River in the west side of Louisville. And then in the last days of the 2021 Kentucky legislature, they passed a TIF that was equal to the footprint of those 9 Black communities. And there was a lot of upset and worry, like, what is happening? What is something being built here? Who's going to get the money? What exactly is happening? Why is this happening so fast? And those organizers from West Louisville, African American women, very, very knowledgeable ladies, were denied the answers. They were thrown out of meetings. So they call us at the CivicLab to try to help them solve that mystery. And that's happening over and over again across the country.
Who is receiving the money then? Would it be actual people that just want to do business, or is it usually just funneled to insiders? The ones who create the tips just funnel the money somehow to the insiders.
Yeah, well, in the case of Louisville, in the case of that particular TIF, it turns out there were two white developers who had already projects in the city of Louisville. And somehow they managed to work with legislators in the area, and they got this law passed. And there's a project that they have in mind, which we're still trying to uncover. What is it? I mean, I think it's a housing shopping mall, that kind of thing that you typically see with a tower and a base that might have retail in it, obviously a parking garage, et cetera, et cetera. We think it's something like that that they're going to do somewhere in one of those 9 Black communities. And they will build it. So I mean, they're the construction managers, they're going to hire the workers, they'll design the building. Now the TIF itself, which will give them the money for this, is going to be contiguous to those 9 communities, and it's going to be run by the insiders, and there'll be 6, I think, community members. I think the board that runs the TIF will be maybe like 12 members, but 6 of them will be just people like you and me from the community. So you don't have an office, you don't have a staff. You show up at this meeting, and even if the 6 community members totally agreed with each other that this is not what they want, they don't have enough votes. So the whole thing is a complete sham. And the more we learn about it, the more worried we are. But that's very typical to how these things happen. In Oklahoma, the governor wanted a TIF, it turns out, for Panasonic. So Panasonic was going to put a plant there. In the end, Panasonic decided to go to Kansas. But again, when the TIF was proposed, there was a lot of questions like, what is it? Where is it? And then after some investigation, it was revealed that Panasonic was going to get the money to build a plant there. So these are the kinds of things that happen over and over again.
So I didn't catch the numbers, though. Those board members, the community members, were definitely outnumbered by the rest of the board then. Yeah,
in that case. But usually that's a very special situation. In most instances, there is no such board. Most TIFs are created by the city, and they answer to the mayor 100%. So this is a very unusual, this one in Kentucky I just mentioned for the Louisville. I don't know of any other TIF in America that's like that. But even so, it doesn't make it excusable. And so we still oppose it. And again, as more and more community members talk to us, we are able to find out details about the TIFs in their community. We're working with a group called Detroit People's Platform in Detroit, and we help them uncover the mysteries of the TIFs of the city of Detroit. And now it's part of their work that they do in educating their own neighbors in fighting for economic justice in Detroit.
In all the research that you have done about TIFs, have you found any TIFs that are do what the TIF is supposed to do?
Yeah, I'm often asked that question, a wizard of ZRD, and the answer is no. I think this is a racist practice. So if a TIF is used for some benefit, like, for example, TIFs are used to build parks, TIFs are used to build schools, and we love that. I mean, the CivicLab is for more public stuff. We want more schools, we want more parks, we want more public health clinics. But they should be funded through the general operating budget of the city in an open and process. So many cities have capital budgets. So when they have their annual budget, to operate the city. But then many cities have maybe a 3-year plan for building something. So they, like, where do we need firehouses? Where do we need a new sewer system, new libraries. So I mean, they have a capital plan, but that is thought out. It's thoughtful. Hopefully, it has some justice to it. So you're not just giving white communities more; you're giving everybody something, and then everyone can see, oh, here's the next 10 libraries that are going to be built. We see the plan, and everyone pays equally. So it could be done through a municipal bond. So if the city takes a bond out, and maybe that's how everyone is paying for it, if you will. The TIFs are nothing like that. So that's why we just think it's a corrupt practice, has nothing to do with economic development or good city planning.
So what you're saying is that TIFs, tax increment funding, is paid by businesses usually, or is it even by the residents? And then they really don't get much for their money.
No, it's a taxation without representation. It's a clouded, secretive process. And you see very wealthy developers who have big time lawyers who give campaign contributions to the mayor and to the alderman, and so they have an inside track, and it's just not right. There's just indefensible. The two super TIFs that are operating in Chicago right now are probably the worst examples of this practice that I'm speaking of. One is called the Lincoln Yards Project, and this is a very big project near where I live in Lincoln Park along the river and Armitage. So they're talking about a city within a city, high rises, very high-end retail, etc. That's $1.1 billion or $1.3 billion in public subsidy from the TIF, just one TIF for that. And there's nobody living there now, right? This is something that's to be built. So we're going to take public money off the table and give it to this developer for his city within a city, and there's nobody living there. So who's going to live there? It's going to be rich white people. Come on, right? And so people who are disadvantaged aren't going to get anything from that. They're not. Maybe they'll sell popcorn there, or I don't know, clean the streets. The other big project that's similarly aggravating is called Project 78. And this is down by the river and Roosevelt. So again, it's a big empty lot. Now it's starting to fill up with some construction. But both these areas are very prosperous. Lincoln Park is prosperous. The South Loop by Roosevelt is prosperous. You do not need to incent, you don't need to subsidize the development there. That is obscene.
The whole
and that's kind of how it goes. In both companies, in one case, it's Sterling Bay is the developer of Lincoln Yards, and the related companies is the developer for Project 78. They're both owned by billionaires. So we're subsidizing the billionaires to build cities within cities in prosperous white communities. If that's not racist, I don't know what is.
Do you know if it was the billionaires who lobbied for these TIFs?
Say what you say again?
Do you know if it was the billionaires, these like Sterling Bay and whatever the other one was, that who lobbied to get these TIFs?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, Sterling Bay hired Alderman Burke, his company, Alderman Burke's company, to be their tax lawyer. But as soon as Alderman Burke was indicted, they fired him. Another vendor involved with Sterling Bay gave the alderman $4,000. Alderman Brian Hopkins. So yeah, there's campaign cash flowing, lobbying, all kinds of things happening at City Hall that we don't see. I think also it was reported in the Chicago Tribune that Sterling Bay hired the consultant that did the due diligence that was then used by the city to justify the TIF in the first place. So that is, again, a conflict of interest, but it barely warrants a notice or a shrug of the shoulders. It's such a business as usual in Chicago, and which is why I said before, you have to remember we're the most corrupt city in Chicago, and I'm giving you multiple examples of that, which is reason why we don't think TIFs can be reformed. They just need to go. And you need to open up the process of economic development and make it much more democratic and grassroots and powered by social justice, not by greed.
Before TIPS, what was there? Was it just not development, or was there another way for insiders to also get their hands on the public funds?
Well, TIPS came to Chicago in 1986 under Mayor Washington. And before that, it was just the city awarding projects, I mean, so you're talking about before Mayor Daley, the 20 years of Mayor Richard Daley, it was completely whatever he wanted to do. And he was focused again on the loop, and the Central Area Committee, which was the planning body that sort of looked at the loop, was thinking about the loop. So, under Mayor Richard Daley, there was really nothing going on in the neighborhoods. So you had, like the Sears Tower. I mean, that's like an example under Richard Daley, having something a big project like that. But under Mayor Washington, he took a different approach, and he wanted development out in the communities, not just, in the loop, in the West Loop, and just everything. For all the planners were just thinking about that. So he tried to make everything turn around, and he thought that the tax increment financing would do it. But unfortunately, he passed away in 1987. And so his dream did not come true.
And his successors used his dream to further their own interest. Then is what you're saying.
Yes, I think that's what happened. As soon as Richard M. Daley was elected in 1989, I believe someone inside his organization saw how these TIFs were in place. There was maybe 7 or 8 of them, 9, maybe 10, no more than that. And they said, "What the heck? This is the goose that will lay the golden egg." And under Mayor Richard M. Daley, the TIFs took off like on a 45-degree angle. So if you look at the chart of the TIFs from 2000 and from 1989 to 92, well, it looks just like this, a straight slope, like a ski slope, until they got to the maximum of 164 TIFs, as I mentioned back in 2008, when No Game Chicago took a look at them. Today, there's about 134.
In all your work on the TIF illumination project, has there been any progress to address the issue?
I wish I could say there was a lot. I would say one mark of the progress is more people certainly know about this because of our work. We've done 187 public meetings to about 14,000 people. That's just a tiny number of people, really, when you think about the city of Chicago. But still, it's on people's minds. And I think what the result is, it's harder for the mayor to push a bad TIF than it used to be. But they're still bad TIFs. So they haven't gone away. But maybe what we can say is we've mitigated the harm. Maybe that's the way I would say it, that we've sort of made people smarter about it, and it's harder to fool them, but it's still being done. So the mayor is still pushing TIFs. She created a new one just a little while ago. And of course, the 2 bad TIFs, the ones I really hate, are still there. So at the end of the day, we've made a small difference, I think.
How much do taxes rise for people if they're in a TIF area?
Well, what happens is, if you have, as I say, 134 TIF districts pushing out, stealing, if you will, removing $825 million of property taxes, what happens is the other units of government, and I mean by that the school board, the park district, the community colleges, the county of Cook, those are some of the organizations that get property tax money. What they have to do is inch up their own taxing rates to cover for what the money is that's not coming to them, that should be coming to them, because they have to put in their budgets. Each unit of government has to put in their budget, but they know that this 825 million that should be in the pool is not available. So they have to inch up their rates. And so what the research that I've looked at says something like this, if you were to take all the TIFs in Cook County and just blow them up, make them go away, the property taxes could be lowered by 11% for everybody. So if that's even halfway accurate, say it's 5%, say that's an exaggeration. I'm thinking about my own, I live in a condo in Lincoln Park, and I'm just thinking about what 5%, what that would mean going back the 20 years I've been here. That would be that I could send someone to college, and I'm saying it's a lot of money just for one person. So 5% to 10% across the whole county, that's a lot of money. So that's the unintended side effect of TIFs.
5% to 10%. You mean that's because of the TIFs, there's that much money increased in the budget, but it doesn't go. It really doesn't go to the community. It goes to the developers.
Yeah, I mean that your property taxes collectively are 10% higher than they should be. That's what I'm saying. And those property tax rates, the extra money did not go to the schools, didn't go to the public transportation or anything. It went into the TIF piggy bank to be given out to the developers or other projects at the mayor's pleasure.
So it's a TIF is money that the city assesses in addition to property taxes. And how many of the TIF residents have to agree to it before it's put into place, or do they not have any say about it?
The taxpayers have no say. So this is something proposed by the Department of Planning and Development. They operate all the TIFs in the city. And the commissioner of that is named Maurice Cox. This is a man, again, who answers to the mayor. So the mayor runs this department. He is her commissioner. And under Maurice Cox is an assistant commissioner. And that is the person who actually day to day manages all our TIFs. But each TIF must be blessed by the city council. So the Department of Planning may propose the TIF. They draw it up. They tell you what's going to happen. This is what we're going to build. They have all those ideas. But the Finance Committee of the City Council of Chicago is the first step. And they will hear that, and then they approve it. And then it goes to the full city council for their approval. There's an additional one other public body that must review along the way, and that is the Community Development Commission. And those individuals are all, again, appointed by the mayor. So they meet once a month at noon. It's in City Hall Council, which is completely inconvenient for most people to go to. But in the history of Chicago, no TIF has been denied. So the commission or the City Council Finance Committee or the City Council itself have never said no. So once the TIF is shown and has come to light, and it appears on the agenda, it's done. It's a done deal.
And those members of the Chicago, the Community Development Commission, the Finance Committee, etc., have there been individuals who voted against the TIF, and then what happened to them?
Not that I know of. Nothing. I mean, it maybe in a finance committee there might have been a divided vote, but it doesn't matter. It gets passed. So there's just no example of anybody successfully stopping a TIF once it has gotten that far. So once the TIF has been announced, like you read about it, in the newspaper, or you see the agenda, so maybe you're someone who gets the newsletter from the city council and you see what the agenda is coming up, and you see that they're going to look at a TIF. It's a done deal. You can show up and set yourself on fire. It won't matter.
At what point can a TIF be stopped then? If it could be stopped before it is announced, is there any way to find out about TIFs in their infancy?
Well, the mayor has in the past, Mayor Daley and Emmanuel have stopped TIFs, again, since it's their creature, they can put they can put in a law that says this tip is crappy, let's just end it. So that is something the mayor has done, because there have been 185 tips made in Chicago, but about 50 of them have expired or were prematurely ended by the mayor. So the mayor can do that, but no one else can. So you can have a petition, for example. Say you had a petition and just had like 100,000 people sign the petition. It doesn't matter. It has no effective law. So you would have to, and this is what we tell people in the community, you would need to elect aldermen who are against TIFs. That's the only way. And then you got to get 26 votes. And then, and this again has never happened, but if you could get 26 aldermen, you could end a TIF. They could do it.
Are there any aldermen right now who are against TIFs?
Well, the only alderman I've heard speak strongly against it is Alderman Carlos Rosa from the 35th Ward. But I haven't seen anybody recently put in any kind of legislation. So I haven't seen anything recently, but I have heard him speak very forcefully against them. But again, if Alderman Rosa was to put in a bill, he might get 4, 5, 6, maybe, I don't know, maybe on a good day 10 co-sponsors, but it wouldn't go anywhere.
Well, since by the way, this is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM, and we have with us at WZRD via Zoom Tom Tresser of the CivicLab. Has Alderman Carlos Rosa experienced any retaliation for his stance against TIPs, or since his stance doesn't mean anything, it wouldn't affect them, then he's fine?
Yeah, no, I'm saying something I heard maybe 3 or 4 years ago. This is not a big deal for him. So he is not known as a vocal opponent of TIFs. He's for a lot of things. He wants an elected school board, an elected police board. I mean, he's for a lot of progressive things. But he's pretty secure in his ward. So I don't know if he's experienced any feedback from that. I doubt it. But again, it's the people are going to have to make some noise. The aldermen aren't going to lead us on this. It's got to come from the people. The people have to demand change. And we invite people to go to our own petition at www.endtifsnow.org. endtifsnow.org, and you'll see our reasons for why TIFs are bad and need to go, and you can sign up.
Have you had any success with this? Are there any case studies in which people have joined and they have fought successfully against some TIFs?
Well, we just learned actually in Berwyn, they were successful. So here's a situation where an alderman there, a city councilman, a very progressive young man named Rob Pabone, he's in the 5th district in Berwyn. He engaged us to do a TIF illumination for a TIF that was being created in the city of Berwyn, just to the west of Chicago. And this was in in March of 21, we did our illumination. He had about 70 people online. He then took those people and organized them and did door-to-door campaigns, and they went to City Hall and they protested this particular TIF that was bothering them. And it went away. The city council decided not to do it. And I think that may be the only example I can share with you, where the people of Berwyn said, no, we don't want this. That's not how we want our money spent. Don't do it. And they won that.
So they ended that TIF. Were there any other TIFs in Berwyn besides
There are. Yeah, there were and there are. But they were focused on this one TIF they didn't want to be created. So that was it. Now they're working on other matters. So once they got that victory, they felt powerful, and now this group of people under Councilman Pabone's leadership are doing all kinds of other workshops on immigration and justice. They're getting themselves smart about other policy matters that they were going to take a stand on. So it's really good to see a leader like Rob working with his people, educating them. He's listening to them, And then again, it just doesn't sit on the shelf. It's not just research for its own sake. They go and then they go advocate for specific laws, or in this case, advocating against a law. And then they're going to move on to other matters. So it's very fun to see. I'm very inspired by it.
Was Councilman Pabon trained by the CivicLab?
Well, we just did that one workshop for him. That's it. He was already a very powerful and accomplished young leader. He worked for a nonprofit in Chicago that did volunteerism, but he's from Berwyn.
Mhm.
So he's quite an accomplished young leader, and we hope to work with him and his colleagues starting in 2023 to continue on these kinds of workshops, training people to run for office, how to be good community organizers. We look forward to that. So that's a sketch that we're working on right now.
What volunteer organization was Councilman Pabon involved with in Chicago?
I can't remember the name of it. It's going to be something like Chicago Cares or something like that. It's an organization that that organizes volunteer work. I think that's what it is.
Okay, well, you can check on it later and maybe get the link to us. That's a very interesting.
Sure.
So when you have these workshops and then you have the volunteers, do you find many that actually do work as Councilman Pabon did? Could you give us some examples of just regular constituents that acted on your advice?
Well, there's a very good group, as I say, in Detroit People's Platform. They've been around a number of years. I would call them a very militant grassroots organization focusing on racial justice, economic equity, and good city planning. And they have a small staff. Detroit, of course, is a much smaller city than Chicago. And when we worked with them for a year, training them on the TIF illumination project, we were working with maybe 20 people from their different members and different allies. And they then went and looked at the TIFs of Detroit and created maps and revealed facts that no one knew about hundreds of millions of dollars in TIF money being spent inside the city of Detroit that really made them very angry. And then what they did is they had their own elections in Detroit, I believe, in the fall of last year. So starting in the summer of 2021, the Detroit People's Platform and their allies organized community forums in which this information was distributed. And then candidates who were seeking public office, especially the city council, would come to a forum and they had to answer the questions about these matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so their feet were put to the fire, and now they're continuing on that kind of campaign with they have a newspaper that they printed 10,000 copies of. So that's all happening in Detroit, and it's as a result of our TIF work with them, but also it reflects their own longstanding work in the city of Detroit on economic justice, racial justice. So that's an amazing story. You can go to Detroit People's Platform and check them out.
Awesome. When you call them a militant group, you meant that they just work very, very hard, 20 people, and they've accomplished a lot. Is that what you meant by militant?
Well, they're like a very powerful grassroots group that challenges the city, calls out the city for racism. They're deeply rooted in their community. They speak truth to power, and they do a lot of organizing and education work and training work, and they challenge power quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's what I mean by being militant.
Do you know if that group has received any grants?
No, I don't know. I'm sure they've received some grants, but again, they're a feisty organization, and they get some national funding. I know, but they take on power, and that has consequences, as we know.
When was your last TIF illumination project? Workshop in Chicago?
Well, let's see. I think we did one in early September. I think it was TIP 101. I think we did that. It was, maybe 25 people online. Yeah, no, we don't have any budget. I have to tell you, I'm speaking to you from my office and my house. Again, we have no paid staff here. So everything we do is grassroots, you know, community organizing style. So yeah, we'll probably get back into the training probably later in the fall. Probably we'll get some more workshops online.
Mhm.
We're starting to think about that.
So all your workshops will be online. You don't have any physical locations. If an organization were to invite you to a physical or location, would you be able to go?
Yeah, we did a community organizing training in I think late August, early September, and that was at a bank in the south side of Chicago. So the Monroe Foundation, which is African American organizer, he brought us there. So yeah, we did it in person. So we're able to respond to requests for workshops online. All the workshops that we told you about for the Illinois Access to Justice, those 50, those were all online. But now that people are coming out of COVID and people are feeling a little more secure, yeah, we're starting to see on being in person. And the CivicLab went to Houston in earlier this about a month ago to spend 3 days in Houston working with Councilwoman Tarsha Jackson. And Councilwoman Tarsha Jackson represents the 8th district in Houston, and we helped her with a retreat and strategic planning process with her staff, and that was all in person. So that was it was great to be back with people, face to face.
Mhm. Okay, so it looks like that maybe well maybe we work with some organizations as well. We might invite you to come do some workshops with us. And then, how many different workshops do you have? We could do a set of them.
Well, you can go to our other training site. It's called the powerinstitute.us. So we offer workshops for the general public, like I mentioned, Organizing 101, how to run for office, Chicago 101, which is the history of Chicago, how our city.
No, we actually meant the TIP Illumination Project.
Yeah, and we do TIP 101.
Mhm.
And the other workshops that would be available for organizations would be board development,
Oh,
strategic planning, fundraising, program development, and civic engagement.
got it. So TIP 101 is only one. You only have one workshop for tips, not a whole set of them then.
Well, we do also TIF 201, which is more about fighting tips and getting into the nitty gritty of strategy. The
Mhm.
TIF 101 is your first stop to just learn about the big picture. TIF 201 is more about, okay, let's fight these things. How do we do that?
Mhm.
We also have workshops on using data for social change. So that's a new workshop. And we also have a workshop called Public 101, in which we talk about why it's so important to support our public services and our public assets in America. Public 101.
Mhm. Oh, such as what kind of services and assets in the public?
Well, anything that has the word public in front of it. So think of your life, going through your life. You went to public school, you get on the public transportation to come to work, you go to a public park with your family on the weekends, you drink public water every moment of your life. Every time you take a drink in the city of Chicago, you're using public water. God forbid you got sick and you need help, you go to a public health clinic or a public hospital, a public, so the word public is everywhere. We use it quite a lot, and that we think it's very important to remind people of that.
Well, Tom Tresser, you could just repeat your contact information for our listeners. We're so glad to have you with us on WZRD.
Thank you for having us. This is Tom Tresser. I'm a civic educator and public defender. I work at the CivicLab. You can find us online at CivicLab.us with links to all the other websites that we mentioned tonight. And you can reach me at tom@civiclab.us. And would be happy to talk to anyone about civics. It's what we love.
Thank you so much, Tom Tresser of the Civic Lab, for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today.